mechanisms for sharing best practice regarding cycling.
I thank him for that, the honourable member, for that contribution, but the Local Government Association has many issues on which to share best practice, and I agree it provides an excellent forum for that. The strength of Cycle England was exactly, it did what it said on the name. It was about cycling in England, and having lost that, we do need something to fulfil that role.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, who's making an excellent speech. Would she agree that the sorts of initiatives and sort of half policy that she's indicating is not what we see when the government comes to transport policy in relation to trains, buses, and in relation to cars and roads? So that's why we need a proper integrated strategy. My honourable friend makes an excellent point. Comparisons are odious, but in some cases they are essential. And I think we can all agree here in this chamber that there is not the focus or some other areas of transport. And I hope when the Minister responds, he will set out how he intends to address this clear lack of leadership. Now, the report notes that successfully increasing cycling in many towns requires not just leadership and political will, but also investment. The report and colleagues today have noted the relative underfunding of British cycling per head. The Department for Transport response to the report was disappointing. The long-term funding issue wasn't addressed at all, and on most other issues, the book was passed to local authorities, and there was no commitment to appoint a national cycling champion. This is not the leadership we need. Newcastle was awarded £5.7 million from the Cycle City Ambition Fund, and I welcome this. And this is on top of the £1.3 million from the Cycle Safety Fund, but this is still relatively little compared to European cities. Now, it is, as has been mentioned a number of times, it is not just the level of funding that is important. Whatever the level of spending per head, investment from government must be continued, steady and sustained if councils such as Newcastle are to plan to achieve their goals with all the resulting benefits that we've heard of. Whilst much of the legwork in getting cycling does and should fall to councils, there is still plenty for the government to do to support them. Newcastle is working hard to make the city's roads cycle-friendly, installing better cycling infrastructure. It is one of the leading local authorities on 20-mile-per-hour zones, with the majority of residential areas and much of the city centre now at 20 miles per hour. In the department's response to this report, they rightly said that planning, cycle routes, speed limits and so forth are local issues. But what about putting in place national standards for cycle infrastructure design, or educating more people with the skills to design it? What about reviewing sentence guidelines for careless and reckless drivers? Investment is important. A long-term pot is almost as important as the amount that goes into it. But above all, Madam Deputy Speaker, ministers in the Department for Transport and their colleagues across Whitehall must step up and show some national leadership if we are to meet the goals set out in the report. Thank you.
Order. I still have 19 speakers who wish to participate in today's debate, so I'm going to reduce the time limit to 5 minutes from the next speaker in the hope that we will be able to get everybody in. Can I ask that, by all means, of course, interventions help the debate, but particularly if the member's already spoken, perhaps they'll bear in mind there are others still waiting to speak. So it's 5 minutes now, and it's Mr. Graham Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to speak in this very important issue. As a fairly recent convert to cycling, I have personal experience of the many benefits, while also conscious of the dangers, especially of those who are those new to the sport, such as myself. The Evans household has become an enthusiastic cycling family with new bikes for the children and not so new bikes for mum and dad. And interestingly, hearing the debate about helmets, I insist that we all wear helmets, and for some reason when I put my helmet on, the children point and laugh. I don't know, I have no idea why. In my constituency, there is a fantastic grassroots movement encouraging residents to get on their bikes. I would like to credit the Northwich Guardian's Pedal Power campaign for really drawing attention to my constituents the importance of cycling. Their profiles of cycling ambassadors, who range from teenage pro-bikers to blind nonagarians, are showing my constituents that a bike is for everyone at any stage of their lives. I welcome the Get Britain Cycling report produced by the All-Party Parliamentary Cycling Group and their target of 1 in 10 journeys to be made by bike by 2025. Road safety is also an issue of great importance to me, as I am presenting my private member's bill on drug driving compulsory assessment to the House on the 18th of October for its second reading. The benefits to cycling are clear. Better health is the obvious starting point. A regular cyclist in his mid-adulthood has the fitness levels of someone 10 years younger, and I think that we've already had many comments about us all wanting to be 10 years younger. When we look at Britain's transport systems, it is clear that there must be a better way. Most of us find ourselves sitting in long traffic jams on that quick run down the road to the shops to pick up some milk and a loaf of bread. In fact, 66% of all trips made in Britain are less than 5 miles. When you factor in getting to where you need to go before hunting down a parking space, it seems daft that you could reasonably often nip down on your bike to the shops. And then there are the economic arguments. Regular cyclists have lower health costs, while the cost of congestion on the economy goes down and productivity goes up. So what is stopping people cycling? The main reason is safety. In the Department for Transport's British Social Attitude Survey 2012, public attitudes towards transport, 48% of cyclists, defined as someone who had cycled in the past year, agree that it is too dangerous for them to cycle on the roads compared to 65% of non-cyclists. It is also worth noting that there is a significant gender divide regarding cycling safety. 60% of women said it was too dangerous compared to 53% of men. I am therefore very proud to be involved in Northwich Breeze Rides, which is designed specifically to introduce more women to cycling in the area and improve confidence in safety. So what can be done to improve safety? When you get on the bike, there are basic steps everyone should take. Putting on a helmet, making sure you have reflectors and fitting proper lights are all ways of making yourself safer and more visible. It seems only logical that there should be simple and automatic steps taken by local authorities to improve... Very happy to give way to my own friend.
Thank you, that's very kind. Next year, I've got the Tour de France coming to my constituency twice, 2 consecutive days. Going to go through villages like Addingham and Stanbury and other parts of green parts of my wonderful constituency. Does you not agree? It's a great opportunity to promote the issues that he's raised here, but also promote a wider issue around health and fitness, and actually a really good opportunity to promote businesses in those communities as well.
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for that wonderful interruption, and I agree. I just hope that those people on the tour have their passports ready to go into Yorkshire and, importantly, to come out of Yorkshire. I welcome the Government Safety Cycle Fund to redesign junctions. However, while encouraging sensible planning, there appears not to be a single, consistent and enforceable design standard in terms of bicycles on new developments. Surely this should be obvious as a part of planning as putting on your helmet before going on a bike. Like many MPs, I have many new house builders coming into my constituency, building thousands of new homes. But looking at the way here in terms of making the road accessible via a bike. Perhaps Cheshire Council and Cheshire as a county, being relatively flat, could be a beacon to all councils to show how cycling can be a pleasure for all. We should look at speeds in residential areas, not just for cyclists, but for pedestrians as well. The Department of Transport has made it easy for councils to impose 20 miles an hour areas, which is a great step forward for locally focused safety. Now is the time to consider whether a default of 20 miles an hour for residential areas, with councils having discretion to change the limits, could bring down many more road incidents. Certainly HGVs pose a major risk to cyclists. Here in the capital, nearly half of all cycle fatalities are due to HGVs, when they make up only 5% of the overall traffic. Clearly, better awareness of cyclists, restrictions during peak traffic times and a greater international cooperation relating to HGV design would be an important step, and I welcome the Department for Transport's ongoing work in this area. The government has made a great investment in cycling, with 148 million invested by 2015, and listening to those in the chamber today, it is clear that cohesive thinking and cross-departmental work will encourage cycling even more. I welcome the excellent work of the all-party cycling APPG, and I hope that this debate has demonstrated how, with a proactive attitude, we can ensure cycling becomes an important part of British life.
Hugh Bayley.
We have a fairly rigid dress code in this chamber, and I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I inadvertently broke it earlier today when, for the first time in my career here, I wore a pair of cycle clips into a chamber. And it wasn't as a way of trying to celebrate this debate. It was just I was rushing here from one of the 2 visits I made this morning by bicycle to get here for defence questions in time to answer my question. To ask my question.
Yes,
I got no answer, but at least I asked it. But then that's the nature of parliamentary questions, isn't it? I make that point because I've been cycling to Parliament and to meetings round about Parliament for more than 20 years. And as other members have observed over that period of time, there's been a huge growth in the number of people cycling, not just the number of people working in the Palace of Westminster, but the number of people in general on the roads of London. And that increase hasn't just happened, it's happened as a result of public policy and as a result of public spending. And this is the first thing I would say to the Minister. We need an increase in government spending to promote cycling and to make the road safer for cycling, but it needs to be long-term and predictable funding, and that's why I particularly welcome the proposal that there should be a spending by his department on cycling measures at the rate of £10 per capita. There are environmental and health benefits to cycling. It's a very convenient way to travel short distances. It's a time-saving way to travel short distances. Nobody's mentioned that it's a cheap way of travelling. And for MPs, and mention one other advantage. I do sometimes use a car in my constituency. When I do, nobody notices me driving around. But when I'm cycling around my constituency, people notice me all the time. They point. They probably laugh, but at least they see I'm in my constituency. So there's a tip to members on both sides of the House. Between 2008 and 2010, York received 3.68 million as one of the 12 cycling cities designated by Cycling England. They had a number of goals. One was to increase the use of cycling by 25%, from 10%, a relatively high level, at the start of a period, to 12.5%. In fact, they increased the usage of cycling by twice the target, by 50%. It rose from 10% to 15%. And interestingly, in York, as many women cycle as men, and that's a goal which we ought to be trying to roll out nationally. We also pledged under this scheme to increase commuter cycling by 10%, from 12%, the level at the start of the period, to 13.2%. And although there's no survey nationally of the number of people who commute to work by cycle, looking at the big employers in York, the increase during that period ranged from 17% to 35%. But getting an increase depends on whether your employer provides incentives such as safe cycle parking, a cycle workshop where you can repair a puncture, for instance, cycle loan schemes. And this House could do a lot by doing more for people who work here. I hope this is something the all-party group will press. I welcome the proposal in the report for a goal of increasing cycle use to 10% by 2025, but we need to have different goals for different local authorities. The honourable gentleman who introduced the debate from Cambridge has a cycling participation level way above 10% already, so does my own city. And we won't get a 10% overall national usage unless we set challenging goals for those local authorities that are already in the lead. The final thing I would ask, though, is that greater efforts are made to have trained personnel working for local authorities to supervise the safety of transport schemes, and for the institutes like the...
Order. Guy Opperman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Who knew, ladies and gentlemen, that this debate was sponsored by the Dutch Tourism Board? Frankly, we look around, so many of us seem to be on a Dutch cycling holiday in the past. I'm surprised by everybody, but I'm here to stand up for cycling in Northumberland, which features everything from the Hadrian Cycleway to the coast to coast, to the delights of Kielder, and also to the Castle Cycle Route. However, I have to say I congratulate wholeheartedly this cross-party group, which has done a fantastic job, probably one of the finest backbench debates we've ever had. My honourable friend from Cambridge, Dudley North, Totnes, and the others on the APG have done a brilliant job. It is a fantastic report. And I needed to make a declaration that I cycle to work here in London, and I can cycle from Fulham, where I live in London, to King's Cross, pretty much all on a cycleway. It is much quicker than going by car. And in Northumberland, I live near Stamfordham, where we would see more bicycles than we would cars travelling around and about. And there is no question that the Northumberland economy is very dependent, to a large degree, upon the cycling tourism and the input of the economic benefit that is brought. So I support wholeheartedly this. But it has to be said that while some cities like Newcastle have benefited from certainly over £5 million, the benefit to some of the rural areas, whether it is Northumberland in my case or other counties, is significantly less. And there needs to be an equality of funding across all parts of the country so that we may all benefit rather than just the simple towns that have been allocated money thus far. Certainly. Of course.
Hi, thank you for giving way, and I, like him, welcome this report to Get Britain Cycling. But he's right about rural areas. Does he agree with me that it needs really quite innovative solutions sometimes to be able to help address opportunities to make it easier to cycle in rural areas, such as the Two Tunnels Greenway in Bath, which I know many of my constituents benefit from, and indeed through the benefit of the canal towpaths that run through my constituency. For otherwise, hedge-lined country roads between towns can be really quite intimidating.
I endorse that entirely. And indeed, when I asked my constituents for their comments, one of them, Ted Liddle, wrote to me on behalf of the mountain biking club and made the point that in our particular area of Tynedale, other than a few parking stands, there had been no cycling investment effectively within his part of Northumberland for the last 10 to 12 years. Now, there are exceptions to that, but at the same stage, if we don't have innovative ways forward and local cycling champions, we will struggle. And I endorse the comment made earlier that we need individual Borises or individual cycling champions of some shape or form who are championing cycling in their particular counties and regions. It is easy when you have Yorkshire has the benefit of the Tour de France coming next year to make the case. And all of us in the north will be welcoming that. But where you don't have such opportunities, I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend very much for giving way, and he talks very much about the need for cycle routes in rural areas, because you don't have the vast, like going along the embankment where you can create the Boris Highway. You've actually got to make sure you've got particular cycle routes, old railway lines and all those likes can be used very successfully, and through to Seaton to Colvile we're working on precisely that. But I welcome this debate very much, that we have cycling in the rural areas.
Well, indeed. Not only that, but this debate is having its converts. Our honourable friend, the eminent colonel from Beckenham, has assured the House that he will be getting back on his bike, which I'm confidently assured is not a penny farthing.
On that point...
Briefly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To the best of my memory, it has pneumatic tyres and a chain.
Long way off
the mind boggles. To know is to fear. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, for those of us who are students of the film industry, we will hark back to one particular comment. If you build it, they will come. And that surely must be the case in relation to cycling. It is easy at the moment for too many of our civil servants, government ministers of all types, local authorities, county and parish councillors, to think that investment in cycling is not worth the money, the effort, the criticism by drivers and pedestrians, and the sheer difficulty in persuading people to get out of their beloved vehicles. But if you do build the type of facilities that we all require in our local areas, then cycling improves. You only have to look at the successes of places like Seville, which is so eloquently set out in the report, where between 2007 and 2010, cycling went up from 6,000 journeys to 60,000 journeys. You only have to look at the changes in New York, the changes that we see in Holland, sponsored as we are by the Dutch Tourism Board, whereby you have 27% of all journeys are by bike, as compared to 2% in this country. That is patently by reason of investment, support and local champions. So I suggest we look at the health benefits. Many have outlined the fact that we have an obesity crisis and we need a great deal more work done on that. We need to look at the benefits of cost of living, and we also may look at both the climate change and the tourism and economic benefits. I certainly would see an urge for local champions, not just the local larger champion of a county, but individual parish councillors, individual county councillors, saying that there is an individual place where they can make a difference locally. And if we can start doing that and start working with health and wellbeing boards and the like, then there is great potential to turn this particular topic not just into a fringe issue that we all passionately debate about, but actually a mainstream way of life and a way of travelling to work.
Mark Lazarowicz.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to be able to speak in this debate. My honourable friend from York Central a few minutes ago made the point that the starting point, if we're going to increase cycle percentages, is obviously going to, in terms of truck journeys, is obviously going to vary from place to place. Some places have already have a very high percentage, others have much lower percentage. I'm pleased to say Edinburgh has a very good record of encouraging cycling over the years. So in our case, there's now 10% of journeys to work are undertaken by bike, whereas about 10 years ago it was only 3%. So we've seen a 300% increase, which shows you what you can do when there's consistent political commitment and spending commitment from a local authority, which has certainly been the case in Edinburgh. But to give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, because he's highlighting the increase in cycling in Edinburgh, and I wonder if he'd join me in paying tribute to Spokes, the Edinburgh cycling charity, who's done so much to help that increase, but also the volunteers who organised Pedal on Parliament 1 and 2. There was 4,000 cyclists at the Scottish Parliament just a few months ago, and indeed I completed the second one myself in a tandem.
Indeed, I saw that from my own eyes, and I took part in a more conventional bike in that Pedal on Parliament. And the point my honourable friend makes is a good one, because, as I said, one reason why we have seen an increase in Edinburgh in the percentage of journeys undertaken by bike has been political commitment over many years. Political commitment, which I'm glad to say the Labour Party over the decades has taken the lead in, but it's also one which, also to be fair, is now widely shared across the political parties in Edinburgh, just as it is in this chamber here today. But as one of my friends from Edinburgh South has pointed out, and I should point out, we were also joined by my honourable friend from Edinburgh East as well in that Pedal on Parliament in this year. We've also had a very effective grassroots campaign first of all in the form of Spokes, the Lothern Cycle campaign, of which I've been a member for many years. A campaign which has consistently and in a very informed way put pressure on local government and central government to deliver both cycle spending but also the integration of policies in wider planning and transport activity to give cycling a higher profile. And we've also seen the very successful Pedal on Parliament initiative, which started in 2012 with a couple of thousand people lobbying the Scottish Parliament at the end of a cycle ride, and which this year ended up with 4,000 people in a very impressive lobby of the Scottish Parliament in I think, May of this year. I'm going to give it to my friend.
One of my honourable friend would agree with me that one of the significant things at that event was the reaction of those who were there to a spokesperson from the Scottish Government who gave only warm words, compared to the local council, which has committed 5% of its transport budget to rise by 1% each year to 9%, because cyclists know words are not good enough.
Absolutely. And the point my honourable friend made about the commitment of Edinburgh Council to not just maintain a 5% level of all transport spend, both revenue and capital, on cycling, but to increase it year on year by 1% is a very major commitment. Chris Baldwin was saying earlier on in the briefing he gave us Sam Busford, I think it was the first city in the UK to make that commitment, and that does contrast, I have to say, with the very poor record which the SNP Scottish Government has had in terms of supporting cycling. And I think what's been interesting is that the effect of the success of a Pedal of Parliament campaign in Edinburgh has actually had now an effect in bluntly shaming that Scottish Government into putting more money into cycling than it was previously, and that I think is a tribute to that kind of campaigning work which is so important at the grassroots. What I would also say, because I don't want to be particularly make particular jibes at other political parties in what has otherwise been a non-partisan debate, even if they're not actually here in the chamber today, what is also the case that in Edinburgh, as I said, we have now seen a cross-party consensus on cycling policies, and the vote is certainly true. To the Labour, our Labour colleagues in the Council made the commitment to increase the spending on cycling year on year. It's also been done now with the support of the minority party in the Edinburgh Council coalition, which is the SNP, so let's hope that the SNP at Scottish Government level will actually follow the example of their colleagues on Edinburgh Council. The final point which I want to make is this, which is something which has been mentioned a few times in this debate, one point which I think needs to be emphasised. One of the factors behind, one of the motivations behind those who organised this Pedal on Parliament campaign, which my honourable friends have referred to, lobbying the Scottish Parliament, was that some of those involved had personal experience of death and serious injury to cyclists on our roads. And I have to say the increase that people spoke about in terms of the increase in deaths and serious injuries to cyclists in England over the last 5 years has also been replicated in Scotland as well. We've seen a similar increase over the last 5 years. And let us not forget that, as well as being obviously in every single case a personal tragedy for families and friends of those involved, it's also the case that every time there is one of these terrible cycling deaths or serious injuries, that does have the effect of discouraging people who might otherwise come back to cycling from going on the roads because they don't realise the wider relative safety of cycling or absolute safety of cycling compared with those forms of transport. So there's all many reasons why it's so vital to now have targets to bring down the toll of death and serious injuries to cyclists on our roads, and I've no doubt that the measures proposed in the Get Brighton Street cycling report, if they were implemented, would dramatically reduce the number of cyclists killed and injured on our roads. And before I sit down, I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. And on that note, does he not agree that of particular importance is the need to address the role of HGVs in deaths from cycling? I believe the figure is around half the deaths in London are caused by HGVs. And it is surely time, as part of this programme, to push for a much more energetic uptake of some of the measures, technology measures, that would make HGVs much safer, much less dangerous for cyclists, sensors, mirrors, sidebars and so on. That surely should be a priority.
Absolutely, and I will close by saying I know that in some of the emails and letters I've had from constituents right up to this debate, there have been a number of cases highlighted where people have been, or their relatives have been, the victims of HGVs in that way, and it's certainly something which needs to be dealt with as a priority. It can be done quite easily now with the technology that is there, and I hope that the Minister will give some indication in his response as to how these changes can be introduced. They are, of course, UK-wide measures and therefore relevant to all of us in the Chamber from whichever part of the UK we come.
Jane Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak in this debate, and very pleased the Backbench Committee could find the time for it. It follows on from a very successful, very oversubscribed debate in Westminster Hall last year, and perhaps illustrates the point that very oversubscribed debates in Westminster Hall can, if you like, transfer to the main chamber and attract even more speakers, as today has done. I speak as an occasional cyclist daughter of a very serious veteran road racing cyclist father. I particularly want to talk about London today and some of the measures that have been going on there. But I mean, first a bit about my constituency and why cycling is so important. There was an enormous reaction last year to the Times Cities Fit Cycling campaign in Battersea. The average age of people who live in Wandsworth is 32, so it's probably typical of my constituency. Many people cycle to work and cycle for pleasure as well, across quite a wide range of demographics, although I think it's right, the points that have been made in the debate about the need to widen that. And actually, I think widening the demographics of people who cycle will actually be a sort of, will set up a virtuous circle. As an occasional cyclist, I can only sort of say it's very off-putting to go into cycle shops and with your old bike and find sort of some 3 young men in lycra leant against the counter saying, "Oh, poor old girl," and I'm never quite sure if they're talking about me or the bike. But I would encourage all cycle shops to remember that they'll do better if they're open to business to everybody, including those who might be serious cyclists. It's quite important. Very briefly, this is, and only once.
Because one of the things which in the UK is 25,000 cycles, and in Germany were 360,000 bicycles. The difference is they were electric bicycles, and they help even the elderly.
Oh, speak for me.
I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention, and electric bikes have already been mentioned. I'm not an expert myself in them, but they have had a few honourable mentions in the debate so far. In London, cycling is set to double in the next 10 years, but the point's been made earlier in the debate that a city like London is not one that was designed for cycling. It's a very old city, and therefore we have to take every opportunity that is offered to us by redevelopment to make it more suitable for cycling. And certainly we're seeing some of that innovative thinking in my own borough. As I mentioned earlier in the debate, I'm afraid I won't, because there's so many people who prepared a speech and need to get in. So Wandsworth has come quite a long way, and I have to say one of the pleasures of the summer was going to a meeting of the Wandsworth Living Streets campaign. And seeing the genuine engagement between them and the Cabinet member, Councillor Russell King, the Cabinet member who covers strategic transport issues. And that's certainly something that I see a positive movement from perhaps when I first came to Battersea in 2006. I think in the debate last year when I spoke, I also talked about the need to champion engineering solutions. It's something we've always been good at in Britain. And again, the council in my council is working with Transport for London to bring forward plans for Dutch-style roundabouts, one of them planned to be in my constituency. But elsewhere in London, we see some of these plans for engineering solutions. Elsewhere, we've seen the bike boxes, the signal control junctions that have got these advanced stop lines. ASLs, advanced stop lines, help motorists and cyclists by providing an area for cyclists to wait in front of traffic when the lights are red. So that makes cyclists in that area more easily visible to motorists, and they have the space to move off then when the lights turn green. We're also seeing plans to introduce Dutch-style segregated sections of cycle superhighway to increase the safety, and we've heard a lot about Holland in this debate, and we pay tribute to their great cycling efforts. But that will see one of the longest continuous segregated sections through the heart of London from to Canary Wharf and Barking. And I think that as we see that developing, it'll be very interesting to see how that works and to see whether that's something that can be replicated in other cities. London is also looking, the Mayor of London is looking to spend significant amounts of money on cycling, and mention was made earlier in the debate about the need for leadership. It's undoubtedly the case, and members on both sides have been generous in paying tribute to the Mayor of London for his leadership in respect of cycling. London's cycling budget will double to almost £400 million over the next 3 years. That's roughly 2.5 times what was previously planned. And he's investing almost £1 billion in London cycling over the next 10 years as part of the Vision for Cycling, which was published in March of this year. That will mean spending, by 2015, £145 million a year on cycling, which actually equates to roughly 18 per head, which is similar to the amount spent in Germany and almost on a par with the debate's favourite country this afternoon, the Netherlands. So it's good to see both some Dutch-style engineering coming to London's roads and also to see some Dutch levels of spending per head on cycling. With regard to enforcement, I think one of the debates we're having locally is as to whether 20-mile-an-hour zones can be enforced, but we are seeing at least TfL, the Met Police and the City of London Police stepping up the enforcement of safety zones for cyclists, but also clamping down on people who jump red lights. I hope that we return to this topic and we have regular cycling debates, and I hope that in a future debate we can look at some of the other issues that affect cycling, such as planning in residential developments for safe cycle storage, a problem in flats, and in particular levels of cycle theft, as I have constituents who've lost 5, 6, 7, 8 bikes in a space of a few short years. So I hope those are topics we might visit in future.
A further 13 honourable and right honourable members are on my list, and I'm keen to accommodate them, but can do so only, I'm sorry to say, by reducing the time limit with immediate effect to 4 minutes. And members can help me to help them to help each other. Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I shall speak fast. I would like to start by congratulating the members, honourable members for Cambridge and for Dudley North for their leadership and drive on this issue, and to say how refreshing a debate this has been. Also to say that I'm delighted to continue my support for safety for cyclists, inspired indeed, as many other members of the House were, by the Time Cycling Fit for Cities campaign. We know indeed that cycling has many advantages: health, providing a fitter population and workforce, saving energy, reducing the degradation of road surfaces, reducing congestion, air quality, but last but not least, it's also jolly good fun. And it's indeed great to speak today at what could be the cusp of a big change in Britain to transform life and the experience of roads for future generations. But to get Britain cycling, not just in individual pockets of this country, and to have a holistic vision, I would like to congratulate the All-Party Cycling Group on this excellent report that we're debating today. Indeed, this report has been excellent for advocating a dream to see that 10% of all journeys are by bike by 2025. I'm glad also that the report has not minced its words on the need for the leadership to start with politicians, because we as politicians do have to think long term to support cyclists, a shared commitment across Whitehall Council, schools, employers and public transport providers. I would like, in my few words, to pay tribute to Hounslow Cycling, and in particular to Tim Harris and Brian Smith, who have been strong advocates and indeed campaigners for improved facilities for cyclists, and their excellent strapline, "Looking forward to Mini Holland in Hounslow." Together with Hounslow Council, there is an exciting longer-term vision for safer cycling, but they have raised some issues which I would like to share with the House today. Firstly, funding. The government response to Get Britain Cycling does not provide any assurance of funding for cycling infrastructure into the future. Indeed, it is a shame that when ministers recently set out annual budgets for road and rail investment for the next 8 years, they failed to do so for cycling infrastructure. Secondly, 20-mile-per-hour speed limits to be adopted on residential roads as standard, which they make a very effective point in that we shouldn't have to fight for campaigns in each neighbourhood to get safe speed limits and good quality cycle lanes and design standards which govern how roads are built. And it shouldn't just be that these are done for cyclists, these need to be done with cyclists whose input at the design stage can have a real impact on the quality of the result. Thirdly, the importance of having a national cycling champion, which so far has not been a proposal that's been accepted, and I wonder if the Minister in his winding up remarks might want to say whether or not that is still the case. And fourthly, enforcement, really to make sure that where we do have rules, that they are effectively enforced, and indeed some of the behaviour changes we need, such as cyclists going through red lights, are also looked at for their safety as well as others. And we do know that 20-mile-per-hour speed limits can indeed make a big difference. In 2009, the British Medical Journal published a review of road casualties in London and found that between 1986 and 2006, and found that 20-mile-per-hour zones reduced casualties by over 40%. Just to close then, Mr. Speaker, by saying that we know cycling has the potential to be a huge British success story. I think we can see many more gold medalists coming through, Olympic gold medalists, if we start behaviours well, start them young, and make sure that everyone feels that they can cycle in the future.
Mr. Oliver Colvile.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And can I start off by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Cambridge, for being able to secure this debate through the Business Committee as well. And can I also thank him for inviting me to serve on the panel too. I suspect I ended up by sitting on it for one simple reason, that I am a reluctant cyclist. And though occasionally I do end up by doing it, the reason why I'm reluctant is because I don't think it is a particularly safe activity. And I fully support the Times' campaign to make sure cities fit for cycling campaign, following Mary Burrs, who of course is still in a coma as well. And to implement our targets, which I fully support, the targets the government needs to make sure that it is strong political leadership, both at local and at national level, and make sure that cycling is safe. Now, during the course of the recess, I have spoken to a number of people in my Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport constituency, and Marie Clark, who rides for Plymouth Yogis, suggested that the government should make compulsory for people to have to wear helmets. She also went on to say that she was appalled when hiring Boris bikes, it doesn't appear that hirers of those bikes are actually offered helmets at the same time. And it's something which I think that the Mayor of London may want to look at. She also highlighted Plymouth's notorious potholes, and I'm delighted that the government and the council are working together to fix them. Anyone who lives in my constituency who wants to have a photograph taken with me and Pothole Pete with a pothole is very welcome to contact me to do so. Now, the chairman of Plymouth City Cycling Campaign, Stuart Mee, also said one of the biggest the problems with it, impediments to getting onto two wheels, is the traffic. He says that only too often there can be cycle routes which actually stop at junctions and don't take them to where they want to do. In Plymouth, some routes are abruptly at difficult junctions. He added that cycling can make Plymouth healthier. Several cyclists who have been watching me doing a little bit of cycling through the streets of Plymouth during the course of the Sky Ride picked up my comments at the last cycling debate, when I made it quite clear that if I were to end up by taking to cycling and to make it safer, I could actually put into effect those words of Tom Bowyer, who had a wonderful, well-known radio programme called Fat Man and Bicycle, and I could actually put that into action. Now, regular health activities can actually save quite a large amount of money, and it's very interesting to note that a child that is born in Devonport, who lives in a really deprived community, is expected to live 14 years less than a child from the city suburbs in my honourable friend, the member for South West Devon's constituency. All parties on Plymouth City Council are supportive of this report, and it's very interesting that the Cabinet Member for Transport in my patch recently told me that over the last 4 years, there has been a 30% increase in cycling. And Sustrans Connect 2 has done an enormous amount to try and connect the west of the city in with the city centre. But one thing which I think would be very helpful is to have a conversation with the Minister at the Department of Work and Pensions to make sure that they can actually provide bicycles to those people who can't get to employment opportunities in places which are the other side of the city, which actually would be quite helpful. And finally, can I also argue for cycle manufacturers to produce cheaper and more basic cycles? I want to buy one, but I don't want to pay £1,000 for it, and I may certainly want to actually have one a bit like the one which Paul Newman
road in Bushcastle in the Sandgatsky, and I may then notice that there may be raindrops maybe keep falling on my head.
It's Paul Blomfield.
Mr. Speaker, can I join others in congratulating the Honourable Member for Cambridge and others from around the House, not only for securing this debate, but for the excellent work in producing the Get Britain Cycling Report by the All-Party Group. I represent a city which has hills which can make cycling a bit of a challenge, certainly for those of us who are recreational cyclists like me. But even in Sheffield, cycling rates have doubled over the last 8 to 10 years, although we've got a long way to go. Compared with, for example, for a change I'll not mention Holland, Hellingsborg in Sweden has 26% of daily commutes into its city centre on the bike, compared with less than 1% in Sheffield. Having said I wouldn't, I will briefly mention the Netherlands, although I hesitated to, because I spent a few days in Tilburg, a fairly ordinary city in central Netherlands last year. What I was struck with was the fascinating consequence of the impact of a planning approach which gives as much focus to the needs of bikes as cars, and it's in contrast with the picture painted by my honourable friend, member for Poplar and Limehouse, on British cycling earlier. Because in Tilburg you saw a town in which elderly couples, families, young people all saw bikes as the preferred form of transport for commuting, for shopping, or for an evening out. It was a transformational experience, and as the Get Britain Cycling Report highlights, there are a number of things we need to do to transform the position in the UK. One is clearly funding, and it's not simply providing more funding, but making sure that the billions that we spend on our roads have funds earmarked within them for spending on cycling and for meeting the needs of cyclists, and that's an important step to move towards Dutch achievements. When I invited comments from constituents in relation to today's debate, I got a huge response, but with a number of common themes. Constituents pressed for more segregated cycle lanes, for more available and consistent cycle lanes, not ones that are used for parking for large parts of the day, or disappear altogether when you approach difficult junctions or hazardous roundabouts. They argued for road infrastructure to be better designed, for speed bumps that don't have gaps at the side, or for routes that follow illogical directions. They pushed for maintenance of cycle routes, both in terms of the quality but also the visibility, both to cyclists and to motorists. They also argued for not only safe routes to schools and public buildings and places of work, but for more secure places to leave bikes when people get there. But there's one very specific point on which I'd like to seek a response from the Minister in his winding up. On the role of cycling within an integrated approach to transport. He will know, and I'm pleased that South Yorkshire has received funding from the government for a tram train pilot, which will see the introduction of public transport vehicles on a continental model running on both tram and rail tracks. And it's a significant development for us, but it's also a potential model for the rest of the country. In that context, it's important we get it right, and part of ensuring we get it right is that cyclists should be able to take their bikes onto the tram trains so that both modes of transport can be used on a journey. This is an issue that I've raised with the South Yorkshire Passenger Transport Executive, as decisions need to be taken now at this stage of system design. But the DFT is also a key stakeholder, and I'd ask the Minister in his closing remarks to join me in confirming that he'll seek to ensure that bikes can be carried on tram trains in this important pilot. In very quick conclusion, there's clearly strong cross-party support for this report, and I hope that this debate will secure a transformation in the UK.
Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we have learnt some fascinating new things today, notably the claim that the Emperor Hadrian created his Great Wall not to keep the Picts out of England, as many of us thought, but to provide the Northumberland Tourist Board with a cycleway. So I join the wave of enthusiasm for the debate and its two sponsors from Cambridge and Dudley North, but I will risk sounding a curmudgeonly note by only giving their report, Get Britain Cycling, 2 chairs rather than 3. And the reason for this is really the report's specific recommendations. Firstly, I would like the title to be Let Britain Cycle, rather than the more prescriptive Get Britain Cycling. Then, I'm not mad on yet another government action plan and annual reports. They won't be bestsellers on the whole. Nor am I convinced that appointing cycling czars and central and local government and devolved authorities, quote, responsible for cycling, unquote, will add to the numbers who get on their bikes. Can't we all be responsible for our own cycling? And like the best missionaries, let our happiness encourage others to get on their bikes without czars. Mr. Speaker, then there's all those national targets. And just as I don't want to see our Gloucestershire Royal Hospital bristling with targets and performance indicators, but bereft of compassion, nor do I want to see cycling targets without the fun. And besides, most of those statistics are, in my view, extremely dodgy. How, for example, does the member for York Central know that as many women as men cycle in York? Who compiles the statistics? And to quote British Cycling on this specific issue, better measures of cycle use at a local level have been introduced recently, but these only give an indication of self-reported cycle use, not distance travelled or numbers of trips. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the statistical measurement and target suggested by the all-party group is at best optimistic and at worst deluding ourselves to the idea that we can measure cycling precisely. So today, instead, Mr. Speaker, what I would like to see is really a celebration of cycling by all of us who've enjoyed cycling, and before the end of this Parliament, I will celebrate 50 years of cycling by going back to my first commercial journey 50 years ago as a 7-year-old to pick peas 4 miles from home. There was a wonderful steep hill, more fun going down than up, very few cars, and that great sense of freedom and fun that you get by being on a bike. And that is my focus for this debate, the freedom and fun, not traffic jams and road rage, which so many other travellers seem to suffer from. I believe that the government this evening has been given a bit of a hard time on its expenditure. It seems to me £128 million in 5 years is good news. And I'm particularly pleased with the local Sustainable Transport Fund, which for a few £100,000 in Gloucester, my constituency, will make a huge difference with improved routes, signs, cycle racks, and even a cycle hub. And I'm looking forward to road test these new routes in a few weeks with an excellent representative in our county council, our local bike action group chairman, Toby, and BBC Radio Gloss breakfast presenter, Mark Cummings. We'll also look at some of the problem areas, and if the all-party group or the Minister knows of a good solution to roundabouts, please let me know the best practice. So, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, because our time has been sharply curtailed, can I say that, yes, cycling makes life better for all, but can I urge the APPG not to become obsessed with statistics and focus more on cycling is fun for all? And let us have the government expand their programme for big cities to small cities, which would be good value for money and great news for places like Gloucester.
Arthur Reynolds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak in this debate on a topic which is important to me and a great many of my constituents. In the curtailed time, I'll just try and say something about the need to make cycling a mainstream transport option and to address the future funding of cycling. One thing that cyclists in my constituency have made clear to me is that they do feel that cycling, which they are very passionate about, is not something that has been taken seriously enough by policymakers. And I think they will genuinely appreciate the turnout and commitment shown in this debate today. I think it's a sign that the report has already had some impact. My constituents, when they contacted me, cited simple mistakes and missed opportunities in public policy and planning that have held cycling back and prevented the growth of its popularity. And it's difficult to disagree with that sentiment, and that is something that the Get Britain Cycling report has highlighted. This neglect has prevented cycling from becoming as popular as it might have been, and that's often then used as justification for the lack of attention it receives in policy terms. And we all know that cycling, we've heard a lot about this today, undoubtedly brings significant health and environmental benefits, but without political leadership at both a national and a local level, it is hard to see how cycling can move from merely an afterthought to an acknowledged major means of transportation. And I think, having listened to the whole debate, it's important to acknowledge that things at the minute aren't as good as they need to be. I think, obviously, a lot of members have highlighted great practice in their areas, but if we give the impression that we were satisfied with the status quo, I think that would be wrong. To get it right, government, local authorities and transport bodies need to ensure that cyclists' needs are properly taken into account. And I would acknowledge, for the benefit of any of my constituents reading this speech, that my own local authority, I know, hasn't always met their expectations in this regard, but I will say, if I can, how we're trying to correct this. The Get Britain Cycling report offers a number of practical solutions to address these problems. One is the cross-departmental cycling action plan, which does sound like it's straight from Yes Minister, but the goal of ensuring that cycling is embodied at the top levels of strategic planning and at the top of the political agenda is surely the right one. And taking it a step further, with central and local government each appointing lead politicians for cycling, again, has to be a good thing. And if you look at the commitment that has been shown to cycling in London, for example, on a cross-party basis over many years, you can see what can be achieved with a strong strategic plan coupled with political will to make it successful. Across my constituency and the Greater Manchester area, I'm also pleased to say that action is now being taken to help Get Britain cycling. As I said earlier, I recognise that in the past people have come to me with quite legitimate complaints about how they haven't felt we've taken advantage of really our position as a borough within Greater Manchester, sitting between Manchester City Centre and the Peak District National Park. And also, we haven't used, I think, cycling fully enough to address the very poor public health that my area has. But now, Transport for Greater Manchester, in partnership with constituent local authorities, is implementing, I think, quite a bold strategy, which combines central government funds with local money to make significant changes. As well as looking at investment in the road network to make cycle-friendly changes to roads and junctions, this has also tried to work to provide facilities specifically for the use of cyclists who wish to ditch their car and cycle to work. Tameside Council have taken the lead in that, trying to build a cycling hub in the centre of the borough and Ashton Line that, once open, will give commuting cyclists the chance to lock their bike up, get changed, have a shower before heading to work. And ideas like that leading on to the major issue, I think, which has come out of the debate, which is how we decide to fund and allocate money to transport projects and the role of cycling within that. And to make this happen, there obviously has to be a strong commitment from government. I welcome the money that has been announced, though I think there are concerns about the loss of Cycling England. And if we are going to catch up with our European neighbours, and we've heard a lot about Holland today, we clearly have to move towards that £10 per head target, as the APPG report recommends.
Caroline Noakes.
And I would like to add my congratulations to the Honourable Member for Cambridge and the APPG for having secured this important debate. It certainly provoked a great deal of interest from my constituents, and I've had a large number of emails, although it's worth noting that only one of them came from a woman. And we heard my Honourable friend, the Member for Weaver Vale, and the Honourable Member for York Central make comment about the cycling gender gap that there is. And it's interesting to note from the Breeze website that there are more than 3 times as many men participating in cycling than women. In Hampshire, the Bikeability Scheme is run by Mountbatten School in Romsey, and they came and gave evidence to the APPG and have contributed to the Get Britain Cycling report, which certainly is an excellent report with some brilliant ideas in it. Annually, the Hampshire School Cycling Partnership delivers in excess of 12,000 cycle courses throughout Hampshire, Portsmouth and Southampton in over 300 schools. And there's a real commitment within the partnership to make cycle training available to all, and both bikes and helmets are made available to those who do not have their own. There's a real belief that cycling is an essential life skill, and every young person should receive a safe grounding in cycling skills and road usage. In the borough of Test Valley, for the last 16 years, they've run the Test Valley Tour, an off-road cycling event which encourages participants from serious cyclists down to the weekend peddler to come and enjoy the Hampshire countryside. And this weekend, as part of the borough's Olympic Legacy project, they're opening a new BMX track in Valley Park. There's not only a competition standard track, but also a learner track to make sure that all levels of cyclists can get involved and take part. And I think it's really important to remember that cycling isn't just about mountain bikes or road bikes. There's a whole broad range of cycling that people can participate in. And I think we have to remember that it's not just about getting from A to B, as much of this debate has focused upon, but actually cycling can be fun just for cycling's sake. Of course, it would be very wrong to suggest that all is rosy in Hampshire, and the experience of off-road cycleways and the conflict with Road Junction is the same as we have heard from many other honourable members. Test Valley works really hard to make sure that there is a network of off-road cycle routes, but what always comes to my attention is the one that runs alongside the A3057, where often you will see the cyclists on the road rather than the cycleway, which frustrates motorists. But when you drill down with cyclists as to what the problem is, they will tell you that it's not just the capital investment that's needed to provide cycleways, but they also need maintaining, and that the small stones that they will find if those cycleways aren't swept can be lethal to the very thin tyres of road bikes, and indeed the tarmac surface of the road is often better for those serious athletes wishing to train in order for them to get up good speeds. And there is also conflict with the many junctions on that roadway, and I'm thinking in particular of Heron Lane in Timsbury, where the markings aren't particularly clear, and road users seeking to access the 3057 are often met with speeding cyclists on the cycleway who think that they have the priority, when in fact it's the motorist. And there are many near misses, which provokes anxiety for both motorists and cyclists alike. Now, I'm not suggesting that better signage is necessarily the panacea to the problem, and in rural areas, to opt for red or, dare I say it, even blue tarmac is often very incongruous and just doesn't fit well with the countryside. But it is important that we look for tailor-made solutions and be innovative in our junction improvements. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. I just wanted to conclude with the comment that one cyclist suggested to me that what we needed was a similar legislative framework. Now, he identified Italy, not the Netherlands, you'll be pleased to hear, where the presumption that any accident, the liability would be with the motorist, not the cyclist. But I conclude with the comment at the weekend of one of our great Olympians, Laura Trott, who said, "It is not always the car's fault. Cyclists need to help themselves," and she is, of course, right.
But Richie.
Speaker, I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate this evening and wish to commend the Honourable Member for Cambridge and my Honourable friend, the Member for Dudley North, in bringing forward this debate as part of the all-party cycling group. I would have to confess that I am not an avid cyclist, but I freely acknowledge the health, the social and economic benefits of cycling, and in fact it can become not only an economic tool in town centres but also one for regeneration, and can help to reduce congestion in town centres as well as reducing pollution. And I think that those factors have already been acknowledged in the report that has come from the all-party group, because the health, the economic and social benefits of cycling are, as the all-party group report highlights, well documented and range from reducing air pollution in our cities to promoting spending in small businesses along commuter cycling routes and improving through exercise the general health of our population. However, Mr. Speaker, I would say there is a growing attitudinal change among the public, who are ahead of us in many ways in understanding the benefits of cycling and in recognising that this issue must not be framed as a debate of cyclist versus the car driver. And this attitudinal change is sadly yet to happen within government. The Department for Transport response to the all-party cycling group report demonstrates this when they state, and I open quotations, "Cycle spending that makes a tangible contribution to other government departments such as health, education, sport and business should be funded from those budgets, not just the Department for Transport," close quotations. And while that statement is undoubtedly true, by presenting it as a bolder opening statement, it is a clear statement from me, maybe, that the Department of Finance or Department for Transport is trying to pass the buck, and perhaps the Minister in his closing remarks tonight will assuage my fears in that direction and prove that that is not the case. If we are to make gains in preventative health for our population and make cycling safer, it is imperative that the government's attitude changes and a pro-cycling cross-departmental approach is developed. And if I look at the Northern Ireland experience and look at the Northern Ireland Assembly, where I was a former member, I have a colleague there who is bringing forward a private member's bill for 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. And I am conscious of what the Honourable Lady from Battersea said here tonight, as well as my honourable friend, the member for Exeter, that they are only successful, perhaps, if they can be enforceable. but there is no doubt that there is an unassailable view that people want to see them happening, particularly in housing estates. And I would have to say that also the money committed by the government to cycling projects was dedicated to the financing of specific worthwhile projects, and already reference has been made here tonight to the fact that there should be a more equitable spend or spread of money so that the benefits of cycling can be seen. And only a few weeks ago in my own constituency, the World Police and Fire Games had the mountain bike trails there and the mountain bike trials, which require considerable skill or involve a high level of risk, but they do have much investment in training. So hopefully, Mr Speaker, this debate tonight will highlight the issue and encourage government and our region.
Grateful to. Thank you. Mr Alan Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I congratulate my honourable friend from Cambridge for introducing this debate, and also congratulate himself and all the other members of the all-party group for their excellent report, Get Britain Cycling. I support the all-party group's recommendations, including in particular an annual cycling action plan and, very importantly, sustained funding for cycling. Liberal Democrats have long recognised the positive benefits of cycling. It assists in tackling road congestion, reducing air pollution and supporting our economy. Not only is it a fast, cheap and green mode of transport, but it also produces a healthier lifestyle. It's a very sobering fact that only 2% of the journeys are currently made by bicycle in the UK. Our European neighbours put us to shame in this regard. And it's also important to note that around half the journeys that are made by car are only a few miles. Surely we can encourage some of these journeys to be made by bike. And I'm pleased that the targets in the motion, and I would hope that the government would also adopt those targets. In 2010, the gross contribution of cycling to the UK economy was almost £3 billion. And according to calculations made, if we encouraged more people to cycle, then we could save the UK economy a few £100 million through reduced road congestion and about £70 to £80 million through less pollution. My honourable friend for Lewis, the Minister for Cycling, has been a champion of cycling for many years, and I'm pleased that he's continued that attitude in government and has done a very good job supporting cycling. For example, last March, the Department for Transport published its door-to-door strategy, which set out how the government is encouraging people to combine different methods of transport in their journey and to increase the number of journeys made by bicycle. In April, my honourable friend, the Cycling Minister, announced £40 million of funding, which is being used at 78 locations to make roads and junctions safer for cyclists. All these schemes are due to be completed within 12 months. In August, the coalition government announced a dramatic boost for cycling funding, and the Prime Minister showed the commitment of the government by making that announcement himself. And this was the biggest ever single cash injection for cycling. Liberal Democrats have long campaigned for more people to be able to ride out with confidence on our nation's roads, and this government is a good supporter of cycling. However, we can't afford to be complacent on this issue, and the all-party group's report offers us the chance for us to support cycling and to ensure that the government continues to work hard to promote the needs and safety of cyclists alongside other road users. I wholeheartedly support today's motion, and I hope the government will build on the good work that is already done by taking forward the report's recommendations.
Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Well, certainly we've already heard this evening about the health and the environmental benefits of cycling, reducing pollution, congestion and pressure on city parking, and of course the economic benefits of a cheap form of transport. And we've seen in recent years some fantastic recreational facilities provided, such as the coastal path in my constituency and a fantastic cycle path going from Llanelli up to Tumble along a disused railway, which has a very, very, very gradual gradient. But of course, what we are talking about tonight is not just recreational facilities. It's about how to get people cycling much more in their everyday lives, not just on holiday. Now, it needs to be practical and safe for people to go by bike wherever they need to go, whether it's going to work, whether it's going to the shops, the doctors, the leisure centres, the cinema and so forth. And that means making routes everywhere both safer and pleasanter for cyclists. We need proper investment, as the report suggests, £10 a head at least, to make sure that we get that infrastructure there. And we need the political will to prioritise spending on cycling. We need joined up thinking across government departments. We need thinking right at the initial stages of planning any infrastructure, but also we need to look at retrospective measures now as well. There have been some adaptations in our cities, but there's a lot more to do. Some of our out-of-town shopping centres, for example, are a disgrace when it comes to pedestrians and cyclists, and there's a lot of work to be done there. Some of our rural roads, we need to think imaginatively, how do we get better visibility? How do we warn about cyclists? How do we make some well-used stretches of rural road where people want to get from one facility to another actually practical on a bicycle? And we've heard indeed about encouraging children and young people through training programmes in schools, but we also need training programmes for young adults, possibly at university, and for adults when they start work. Ways to encourage people to cycle. We also need to be aware, if we're talking about young children and school pupils, that designated cycle areas, like along a canal, like along an old railway track, may not be suitable if they're not well lit and visible. They need to be within the public domain, within easy contact of a lot of people, otherwise they're not going to be suitable for use by children going to school. All sorts of ways we could think of encouraging people, whether it's by having special events, whether it's by getting people to get out your bike day, get them to have opportunities to have their bike maintained, have it looked at, get things working again and get themselves back into the habit of actually trying to go by bike. We also need to sort out the issue of other forms of transport. Although there's been a lot of progress with trains, there are still times when you can't take your bike on the train. There are still awkward incidents where there seems to be no joined up thinking in that way. I'd like to mention very quickly the Welsh Government's Active Travel Bill, which will go through stage 3 of the legislative procedure on the 1st of October. This bill aims to encourage non-recreational walking and cycling, active travel routes which people use for work, for school and for shopping. And the bill requires local authorities in Wales to produce and distribute comprehensive maps showing all the active travel routes in their areas, and most importantly to make a continuous improvement to the range and quality of active travel routes. They'll be expected to make year-on-year improvements either by expanding the amount of facilities or by upgrading existing facilities. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister, as he will have heard this evening, tremendous cross-party support for increased investment in cycling, if he will now convince his colleagues across government that this is the right way forward, that we want better investment and we want clear directional thinking and real political will to put cycling right at the heart of government.
Leith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd want to congratulate the Government on providing this extra money to support the development of new safe cycle routes in Britain separated from traffic. Many people are saying there should be more money. Yes, we can always spend more money, but I think the Government has shown great leadership by making this money available. And I'm especially pleased that some of this money has been directed to national parks, including the Peak District north of my constituency, where so many people go to spend their leisure time, yet where it is still very dangerous for families to cycle along many of their roads. My constituency of Mid-Derbyshire lies across the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, which kick-started modern economies, the development of technology and ultimately globalisation. Yet it is still not possible for a family to cycle down the heritage site safely from one historic site to the next. Whilst part of the heritage site falls within the national park, the part in my constituency and that of Derby to the south does not. And I would like to request the Minister that some funding be provided to enable the extension of the cycleways now proposed down through the World Heritage Site via historic mills at Belper, Milford, Darley Abbey to the Silk Mill Museum in Derby, which many people did not realise was the world's first multi-storey factory. The tourist business that could be generated by attracting people throughout the world to share the interpretation of the world's industrial heritage should not be underestimated. And once a new velodrome is opened and completed in Derby South, even more cyclists will be attracted to the area. Germany, Austria and Italy have already harnessed the potential of attracting cycle tourists to increase their tourist income, which has the benefit of being spent mostly in local villages and towns, either through the small-scale catering industry or buying regional products, therefore supporting local growth in jobs and the economy. And we're trying to do that in Belper particularly. Local food, local products and Transition Derby are trying to stop people using their cars one day a week, which isn't too much for people to do. But this isn't the only benefit which could come from extending the cycleway to the south. The added value of providing a safe cycleway from the Derwent Valley into Derby is that it would also serve the needs of numerous commuters living in the towns and villages in the valley, especially Belper, as I've mentioned, Milford, Duffield, Little Eaton, Allistory and Darley Abbey, providing a safe, healthy, carbon-free alternative mode of transport that would reduce congestion and therefore pollution. And the benefits of such expenditure to both leisure users and city communities is self-evident. I therefore ask the Minister to consider adding to the current proposals for cycleways in national parks to fund an extension of the cycle route from Matlock, and he knows about Matlock from his Secretary of State, who is that Member of Parliament for Matlock, down to Derby through the Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I warmly welcome the recommendations in the Get Britain Cycling Report, and I want to add my congratulations to the All-Party Group for the work that they have done on it. The benefits of increasing cycling to public health, to air quality, congestion, the local economy and people's overall quality of life are huge and undisputed. The report provides a comprehensive set of steps to achieve a bold vision. A cycling revolution isn't just about incremental growth in a few areas of the country. As the report sets out, what we should be aiming for is a dramatic increase in the number and diversity of people who cycle, because they see it as a safe and normal activity. Therefore, while warm words about cycling and some extra funding are of course important, I have to say I do find it disappointing to see some rather half-hearted and rather complacent responses from the government on so many of the other recommendations. And I think what's been really striking about the debate this afternoon and this evening is the breadth of support from all areas of the House for more priority to be given to cycling. And I hope very much that in that context that the Minister will take another look at the merits of being more proactive in making the cycling revolution a reality. I've been impressed when I was sitting here earlier in the afternoon to hear so many local examples of good practice, and I wanted to add a few of my own from Brighton and Hove. Brighton and Hove is a very cycle-friendly city, and I wanted to highlight a few of the fantastic local initiatives. And they powerfully illustrate some of the tremendous benefits that could be unlocked by acting on the report and through meaningful political leadership at a national level as well. And so, for example, Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club is constantly encouraging, promoting and facilitating cycling to the stadium, which is about 5 miles out from the city centre. Bike train rides are organised by experienced volunteers to help cyclists to take up a good amount of road space and benefit from safety in numbers. All that helps to cut air pollution, so it's not just those on the bikes who are reaping the health benefits. And I myself have taken part in the bike train on a number of occasions and experienced how incredibly helpful such schemes are, in particular for getting less confident people on a bike and ensuring they enjoy the experience by making it feel normal and safe. Second, there's to be an exciting new cycling hub at Brighton Railway Station, which was approved in July by the City Council. This will increase the number of bike spaces by 420 to a total of 670 and provide shower and changing facilities, a bike shop, a cafe, a cycle repair outlet and bike hire, all in one place right at the station. Great for new and experienced cyclists alike. And thirdly, we have a new 1.8 kilometre cycle lane that is about to be introduced that recently introduced that separates bikes from motorised traffic along the old Shoreham Road. People feel much safer, cycle journeys have rocketed by 30%, and it's been praised by many. Such Copenhagen-style improvements are crucial for cyclists to feel safe, especially those who are new to cycling or less confident. In response to requests from residents, the City Council is now consulting for a second phase of a programme to introduce 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. And that, again, is not just about cyclists, it's about improving the street environment for all road users, including car drivers, by reducing the number and severity of collisions and casualties, improving traffic flow, and making the city a safer and better place to live in. A default speed limit of 20 miles an hour is a key recommendation of the report that I think that ministers shouldn't dismiss so quickly. Changing speed limits isn't expensive, but adequate long-term funding is needed for schemes such as new cycle lanes if we're to be serious about cycle-proofing all roads. Finally, I say a few words. Obviously, the environmental gains of the UK becoming a truly cycling nation are great, both for local air quality and cutting carbon pollution. But I just want to end by emphasising that there are very good economic and social reasons, and they alone would be ample grounds for full implementation of all the recommendations of the report. For example, 1.5 million people are in transport poverty, according to a Sustrans report last year. Those are people unable to get to jobs, shops, healthcare or schools because they can't drive or run a car, public transport is inaccessible, and they can't use bikes either. More investment in bikes would help them tremendously.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As one of the panel members of the All-Party Parliamentary Cycling Group's report, Get Britain Cycling, I'm particularly delighted to be taking part in today's debate. And I'm also delighted because I'm undertaking the Parliamentary Sports Fellowship with British Cycling for the coming year. Now, I fully support the report's aims, especially the target of 10% of all journeys being by bike by 2025 and 25% by the year 2050. The motion also calls for government to show strong political leadership, including an annual cycling action plan and sustained funding for cycling. So I'd like to particularly welcome the latest government action, which includes making it easier for councils to install cycle facilities, cycle proofing of road infrastructure, and for stumping up £148 million of new funding between now and 2015. In fact, I was with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, at the headquarters of the Peak District National Park over the summer, hearing about their ambitious plans, Mr. Speaker, to improve and encourage cycling there. With part of the national park in my constituency, I was delighted to hear that cycling in the Peak District National Park is being given a £7.5 million boost to enhance the cycle trail network. This will put an estimated 3.5 million people within reach of the Peak District National Park cycle network, either by bike or following just a short train ride. Now, cycling has gone ballistic in my part of West Yorkshire. My personal passion began with a series of country ride charity bike rides with Huddersfield Town Football Club. The Keep It Up campaign has raised just short of £1 million for the Yorkshire Air Ambulance, as hundreds of Huddersfield Town fans have been sponsored to cycle to and from opposing teams' football grounds. So well done to all of them. And the Tour de France's Grand Départ will be coming through my constituency on Sunday the 6th of July next year. Huge numbers of cyclists already out on the route. B&Bs are booked up and cycling-related festivals and events are being planned. And the government is backing the Tour de France in Yorkshire with £10 million of funding. And it wouldn't just be one day of the Tour de France in Yorkshire region, because there's now a legacy project, Get Yorkshire Cycling. It's a 10-year strategy, and it will unlock potential in the areas of health, the economy, environment, transport, tourism and community engagement. But as well as investment, cycling safety is paramount, and that's been foremost in the minds of many people in my Colvile Valley constituency this summer. John Radford of Meltham is a popular cycling champion, but he's now fighting for his life after he was in a collision with a car this summer. He suffered severe head injuries and had to be airlifted to Leeds General Infirmary, where he remains critically ill. John is chairman of Huddersfield and District Cyclist Touring Club, and he's been working tirelessly to promote cycling locally and nationally. Cycling is a community, and last month I joined 200 friends of John to take part in a 6-mile ride to show our support and help raise cash for the Yorkshire Ambulance, which flew him to hospital. The ride was organised by Councillor Martin Bolt, the Mayor of Kirklees. And I know, Mr. Speaker, the whole House would like to send their best wishes to John Radford and his family. I won't give way. I've only got 30 seconds left. So, Mr. Speaker, just to wind up, British Cycling is continuing to work with ministers and the likes of Sustrans and CTC to push for change. It's not just about safety. We need to get cycling sitting at the heart of transport policy. And as cycling becomes more and more popular, we need to make it safer as well. We need better collaboration between government and departments. And, Mr. Speaker, let's get Britain cycling.
Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When some of my constituents who contacted me about this debate and urging me to take part in it did so, I think they may have been surprised when I wrote back to say, well, I will be putting in to speak, but I can't guarantee that I will get to speak, or indeed for very long. And I think they'd be surprised, because I think the British public generally would underestimate the degree to which this House is indeed seriously interested in cycling, certainly in the time that I've been here, and debates are very much oversubscribed, and that's a huge step forward. And it's perhaps a pity that a debate of this nature, which is so well supported, doesn't get the publicity. It won't be on the front page, I suspect, of many newspapers, despite all our best endeavours, because it perhaps is too consensual. I mean, the British public is a little bit sometimes, or maybe it's the media, is a bit odd about this, because on the one hand we're always being urged to be more consensual, but when we are more consensual, then we're kind of ignored and it's not very important. So I hope that at least there will be some attention given to this, because it is very important that we talk about, as the Honourable Member for Totnes and the Honourable Member for Gloucester said in particular, about the fun and enjoyment of cycling, not just about all the problems. And I think it's also important that perhaps people realise that, you know, we are as MPs human beings who get cycling. And the member who said that you might not look like an MP if you turned up sweating from cycling, well, you know, MPs are people. That's how we are. And I think my constituents, when I was first a councillor and was cycling around my ward all the time, did think I was a touch eccentric initially, but as they got to know me, they realised it was in fact very sensible. Because the other thing about cycling is the way it gets you to places where you want to be very quickly and efficiently, particularly obviously in cities, and there's a different issue in rural areas where sadly actually cycle use is falling, not rising, and that is clearly an issue that we have to look at. But when I was a young trainee solicitor, I was asked to deliver an offer. Now, you had to deliver housing offers for a sort of 12 noon deadline. This was pre-fax and pre-email. You actually physically took it down. And my boss said, this has got to be delivered by 12 o'clock. So I said, well, I'll just go and take my bike. No, absolutely, he insisted, he threw me the car keys and insisted that I should take the car. And of course, taking the bike would have been much more efficient, because once you even get the car to the place, assuming you got it there in time, you could know where to park it. So by the time you park it 5 minutes walk away, you have gained absolutely nothing. People have to understand that. And I'm just slightly disappointed, even in a city like mine, where generally, and I referred to it earlier in an intervention, a lot of money is being spent on cycling, there's a lot of support for cycling. It was disappointing that in deciding how to or proposing how to deal with Princess Street once the trams arrive and start working. So a proposal to have an only one-way cycle route along Princess Street, which is the prime street of the city. And one of the arguments for that was that, well, the alternative route, which would have a two-way cycle route, was actually on the national one of the big national cycle routes, and people would want to go through it. But for most of us, I admire greatly people who do long-distance cycling, but I'm not one of them. And for many of us, it is a daily event, but we want to go from A to B easily. So I hope that perhaps Edinburgh Council's listening, but other councils as well, you have to make it easy for us to get to where we want to be. And that will encourage a lot of people to get cycling.
Mr. David Rutley.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't learn the joys of cycling in Holland or indeed in Hexham, but in the constituency of the Transport Minister himself as a young teenager. But I've gained a far greater appreciation of cycling since becoming the Member of Parliament for Macclesfield over the last few years at several levels. At the elite level, we're fortunate to have the National Cycling Centre in Manchester, and Team GB are often seen training out on the junction between the Cheshire Plain and the Peak District, where we're so fortunate to live in Macclesfield, cycling up the Cat and Fiddle Road, and then setting the standard that's so clear in how you can take elite sport forward. We're also privileged to have Dame Sarah Story living in Disley, our most decorated Paralympian of all time. And I think that it's only fitting, I'm delighted that they are, that Disley Parish Council are unveiling a commissioned sculpture in her memory in a few weeks' time, celebrating her tremendous accomplishments with an amazing cycling day in the village. We're also fortunate to have an incredible cycling club, Macclesfield Wheelers, that sets an incredibly high standard with their legendary cycling trials between Macclesfield and Congleton. And they're also setting a really high standard in terms of being advocates for their pastime, for their passion, and have certainly helped me gain a greater understanding of what needs to happen to take cycling forward. But what's most encouraging for me is to see the number of people that are taking to cycling under their own initiative. Whether it's getting out into the Peak District, we've heard many MPs speaking about that, or enjoying Macclesfield Forest, getting out on the Middlewood Way with their families, or just taking the bike to go to the shops. People, the public in Britain, get cycling. They understand about the benefits, and it's not just because of what's happening with the Olympics or indeed the Tour de France and the way that we've seen great successes there with Sir Bradley Wiggins, but they're seeing the health and well-being benefits as well. And it's...
Thank you, Honourable Gentleman, for giving way. One of the things that's perhaps omitted from this report is safety helmets for children under the age of 15. Does the Honourable Gentleman feel that perhaps maybe there should be compulsory use of helmets for people that age to prevent accidents, because that's where the greatest number of accidents take place?
I think that's a subject that's been well debated today. I think there are pros and cons, but I think the overwhelming suggestion from people here is that if you do make them compulsory, fewer people will cycle. And what we're trying to say here is let's get people cycling. This isn't about a health and safety fest. This is about encouraging people to get out, cycling, and seeing the health and well-being benefits, which are very, very profound and lifelong, unlike with football or rugby or some of the other sports that we are very keen to support here. These are lifelong. I think the other thing that we should notice is that there's a real boost for the local economy as well, particularly in rural areas. Cycling is vitally important for providing revenues for countless B&Bs, guest houses, cafes, pubs, and let's not forget local cycling shops that seem to be springing up in many, many villages. And given those important benefits to tourism, I'm delighted, joining other colleagues from Colne Valley and elsewhere, to highlight what the Peak District National Park are doing to get more people cycling with their cycling festival, which I think is taking place next weekend. And in fact, I've been out cycling with the Secretary of State for Transport himself on the Monsell Trail, just to show that he is absolutely committed and understands the importance of cycling. And as the co-chairman of the Mountaineering APPG, I'm passionate about campaigning for getting people out, active outdoors, typically on 2 feet with the Britain on Foot campaign. But I recognise today that it's vitally important to get people active on 2 wheels as well. And it's fantastic to see the degree of participation in this particular debate. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the government is taking action in this area. Many have talked about the important funding for cycling ambition grants. That will have profound benefits for cities like Manchester and also national parks such as the Peak District. I'm pleased that more steps are being taken to encourage the setting up and making it easier for 20-mile-an-hour speed limit zones to be established. But speaking to Macclesfield Wheelers and the chairman, Peter McCookian, earlier today, there is more that needs to be done. We need to improve signage to ensure that people feel safer on the roads that are out cycling. He also talked about the importance of setting up more advanced stop positions as well. That will be vitally important for cyclists. And the other thing that he really asked me to urge was please take motor-related offences relating to cyclists much more seriously than they have been in the past. Let me just conclude by focusing on the potential for cycling. I've got a mother who's Danish, so I understand from an early age the importance of cycling. For many people, it's not just about a sport or a way of life, or rather an outdoor activity or a mode of transport. It is part of people's lives. There's real potential here to making a way of life that will benefit countless people.
Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this has been an excellent debate with positive contributions from, I think, 33 colleagues from all sides of the House. The clear message from this debate is that Parliament wants to see greater support for cycling, not just from the government, but from all parties. And on behalf of the opposition, that's the call to which I wanted to respond this evening. Let me first pay tribute to the all-party parliamentary cycling group. The Get Britain Cycling report is excellent, well-argued and persuasive, and has had a considerable influence as we've looked again at our own approach to cycling as part of Labour's policy review. I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Cambridge on securing and opening the debate on behalf of the all-party parliamentary group, but I particularly also wanted to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the Honourable Gentleman for Dudley North. He also made an excellent contribution to the debate, of course, but less visibly, but absolutely vital, is the energy with which he sought to persuade my colleagues and I that we must make a much greater commitment to cycling and that we must go significantly further than the important progress we started to make in government. Can I finally just also mention my honourable friend, the member for Poplar and Limehouse? He not only made a customarily informed and passionate contribution today, but's been a powerful advocate for both cycling and improved safety on our roads for many years. Advocacy that, as a respected Transport Minister, delivered real policies that saved lives. I'm very sorry to have lost his expertise as a member of our front bench team. However, I know that he will continue to make a considerable contribution on this and many other issues in the future, albeit from the backbenchers. Mr. Speaker, I'm very clear that supporting cycling is a hugely cost-effective way of improving our personal and national quality of life. When nearly a quarter of all car journeys are less than a mile, making cycling a more attractive option has great potential to cut congestion and boost the economy. With families facing a cost of living crisis, making more journeys by bike is a good way to reduce the impact of rising fuel costs on the household budget. And as a cost and time effective way of staying fit, as many members have attested to this evening, cycling has real health benefits. And of course it benefits the environment, helping us to cut emissions and reduce transport's contribution to climate change, which remains significant. And this message is being heard, with 20% more people cycling than a decade ago. Yet if you go to the Netherlands, as I also have, as part of our policy review, it's apparent how much further we still have to go. In Holland, a third of all trips to and from rail stations are by bike, compared to 2% here. Now, I've seen for myself the fantastic facilities for cyclists at stations in Holland, not just bike spaces, undercover staffed storage, with people on hand to repair and maintain bikes whilst owners are at work. It is a matter of investment, 10 times more per head of population on cycling in Holland than in the UK, but it's also about attitude and commitment. And I'm sorry to say, Mr. Speaker, that we haven't seen that commitment from this government, the commitment that we need to see, both to increase cycling and to make it safer to cycle. Immediately on taking office, Transport Ministers abolished Cycling England, but more importantly, its annual £60 million budget and the Cycling City and Towns programme that we had established. And since then, we've seen policy after policy that sets back the progress we were making. Targets to cut deaths and serious injuries on our roads have been abolished, even though they brought a focus to efforts to improve safety. Think road safety campaigns have been downgraded. We've seen the numbers of road traffic police fall and support for speed cameras axed, making enforcement much more difficult. And longer HGVs have been given the green light, despite the Department for Transport's own analysis of the consequences for increased road casualties. Finally, this summer, we had the long-awaited promise that axed funding for cycling would be restored. But headlines about £148 million turned out to be spin. The reality is an average of just £38 million a year until 2016, with the rest to be found by local authorities. That's a third less than used to be invested under the previous government. And with only 1/10 of the population benefiting, this is simply too little too late after 3 wasted years. Now, I think it's clear we need to see a step change in the commitment to cycling from government, and it should be a long-term commitment that's supported by all parties, and it should last across parliaments. So I want to briefly set out some clear proposals for what should form the basis of that new commitment, and I hope that the Minister, when he responds, will respond positively to each of these, so we can begin to forge the cross-party consensus that cycling needs and deserves. First, we must end the stop-start approach to supporting cycling, and that means long-term funding of the infrastructure needed for dedicated, separate, safe cycling routes. Ministers recently set out annual budgets for rail and road investment up to 2020-21, but failed to do so for cycling infrastructure. That means that while there's a £28 billion commitment to roads, we have only a one-off £114 million from central government for cycling, and that's spread across 3 years. I think it's time for a serious rethink of priorities within the roads budget, with a proportion reallocated to deliver long-term funding settlement for cycling infrastructure. The priority for investment to support cycling must be dedicated, separated infrastructure to create safe routes. In the past, the focus has too often been on painting a thin section at the side of the road a different colour. Genuinely separated cycle routes are vital to improve safety, but also to build confidence, as we've heard from many members speaking today, and encourage those not used to cycling to make the switch to 2 wheels. It's also important that a commitment to new infrastructure does not become an excuse not to improve the safety of cyclists on roads where there is no separation. The priority here should be redesigning dangerous junctions, where almost 2/3 of cyclist deaths and serious injuries from collisions take place. And we need much greater use of traffic light phasing to give cyclists a head start. Second, we need to ensure we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. So I've proposed a new cycle safety assessment before the green light's given to new transport schemes. In the same way that departments have to carry out regulatory impact assessments and equality impact assessments, there should be an obligation to cycle-proof new policies and projects. And we need new enforceable design standards with measures to ensure compliance. Third, we need to see national targets to cut deaths and serious injuries restored. However, in future, these should sit alongside a new target to increase the level of cycling. The number of cyclist deaths is tragically now at a 5-year high. Targets alone are, of course, not the only answer, but they do help focus minds and efforts, and ministers are wrong to reject them. However, it's vital to ensure that targets don't perversely lead to local authorities and others seeing the way to cut deaths and injuries as being to discourage cycling. In fact, cycling becomes safer the more cyclists there are on the road. So we should learn from the success that's been achieved in other European countries, where clear goals have been set to increase levels of cycling alongside the policies necessary to achieve them. Fourth, I believe we should learn from Wales and look to extend their active travel legislation to England. Legislation which sets out clear duties on local authorities to support cycling. Local authorities are absolutely central to devising, prioritising and delivering measures to support cycling. And it's important that additional support from central government is matched by clear obligations. To assist them, we should be providing councils with a best practice toolkit for boosting cycling numbers based on what we learned from the Cycling City and Towns programme, as well as evidence from abroad. Councils should be supported to deliver 20-mile-an-hour zones, increasingly becoming an effective default in most residential areas. Fifth, we have to ensure that children and young people have every opportunity to cycle and to do so safely. The government should not have ended long-term funding certainty for the bikeability scheme, nor axed the requirement for school travel plans. These decisions can and should be reversed. Sixth, we need to make it easier for cycling to become part of the journey to work, even where the commute is too far to do by bike alone. Employers can play an important role in providing access to showers, changing facilities and lockers. However, our public transport providers need to step up and do much more too. So instead of the government's approach, which has been to propose a weakening of franchise obligations, we should instead toughen up the requirement to provide station facilities and on-train space for bikes within rail contracts. Seventh, we need to ensure that justice is done and seen to be done in cases where collisions lead to cyclist deaths and serious injuries. I welcome the recent commitment from ministers to initiate a review of sentencing guidelines. It's vital that this is a comprehensive review of the justice system and how it protects vulnerable road users, and it should be concluded without delay and in this Parliament. We'll certainly be willing to work with government to implement sensible changes that may be proposed. Finally, we need tough new rules and requirements on HGVs, which are involved in around a fifth of all cycling fatalities. Despite them making up just 6% of road traffic, there's clearly an issue there. We should look at the case for taking HGVs out of our cities at the busiest times, as has happened elsewhere in Europe, including in Paris and Dublin. As a minimum, we should require safety measures on all HGVs, including sensors, audible truck turning alarms, extra mirrors and safety bars, as well as better training and awareness. I've previously suggested to ministers that the £23 million expected to be raised annually from the new HGV road charging scheme could be used to support the road haulage industry to achieve this. I hope that this idea will be taken seriously and considered by ministers, along with all of these clear proposals, which, taken together, would, I believe, be a significant improvement on the government's current approach and is something that all parties could support across the House. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, cycling has the potential to be a huge British success story. But it needs a new approach and shared commitment across government, councils, schools, employers and public transport providers. Most of all, it needs ministers to cut the spin and instead give cycling infrastructure a greater priority within the existing transport investment plans that they've set out. It's time to end this stop-start approach that's getting in the way of progress and agree a cross-party, long-term commitment to cycling.
I call the Minister, Norman Baker.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all welcome the fact this debate is taking place, which follows on from the very successful debate in Westminster Hall, also engendered by the all-party cycling group, and pay particular tribute to my colleague, the member for Cambridge, and a member for Dudley North, for their leadership of the all-party group, and indeed to all members of that all-party group for what is a very good report. And can I also welcome the fact this has been a well-attended debate, and the contributions tonight from all sides, which have almost without exception, been positive and constructive. And I'm particularly pleased to hear the news of individual MPs who are taking up cycling. That's now in Hansard on the record, and doubtless their constituents will hold them to that particular commitment. Mr. Speaker, the government wants more people cycling more often, more safely. We're determined to drive that forward. I believe we have a good record to date, but I want to be clear, we want to go even further than we have gone to date. But I believe that we have here the most pro-cycling government this country's ever had. And we're determined to go even further. Cycling is good for the environment, good for individual health, and good for the economy. Good for the environment, it cuts carbon emissions, noise and air pollution. It's good for individual health, and that's why I'm delighted that the Health Minister, member for Guildford, has been here in this debate, and the contribution which the Department of Health is making towards our cycling efforts in government, and indeed the financial contribution which they're making to some of our projects. And also, I would say, the NHS reforms now give an opportunity at local level for public health, the public health function, be discharged in conjunction with the transport function in a way that simply wasn't possible before. But it's also good for the economy. And last week I was in Cambridge, where, of course, 47% of adults cycle at least once a week. And I want to congratulate the three councils there, the Conservative Council of Cambridgeshire County Council and South Cambridgeshire, and my Lib Dem colleagues in Cambridge City, who are working together to promote cycling. And the lesson there is that where the population of Cambridge has risen from 105 to 125,000 in a decade, car travel is flat because they have incentivised cycling. And if they hadn't done that, those three councils together, there would be gridlock in Cambridge as a consequence. So the lesson is that those who want to help the local economy will help the local cyclist. Those who advocate anti-cycling policies damage the local economy. Now, in terms of the also the economy, it's worth pointing out a 20% increase in cycling levels from 2010 to 2015 could save the economy £207 million in terms of reduced traffic congestion and £71 million in reduced pollution levels. So those members on both sides who have drawn attention to the economic value of cycling are absolutely right to do so. I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and of course he knows there is going to be a huge boost to tourism in Yorkshire from having the Tour de France next year. I didn't get the chance to raise this in the debate. In Otley, which is part of the route, where we had Lizzie Olmsted winning the first medal in London 2012 Olympics, we also have a lot of work going at grassroots. Does he agree with my constituent Joseph Cullen, who is working very hard to get ordinary people cycling? Does he agree with me that it's important to get ordinary people cycling as it is to get the Olympians of the future, which is also important?
I entirely agree, and as one member said earlier on, cycling has to be for everyone, and that's the government's intention, to try to make sure that that message goes out loud and clear. I will briefly.
Hugh. The Minister said a moment ago that this was the most pro-cycling government ever. What is his response to the disgraceful comments of the Community Secretary that cycling was an obsession of the elite and he wanted to make a free-for-all for motorists to park on WO lines?
I think the Community Secretary is capable of answering for himself. But I want to mention the funding arrangements which this government has put in place, because if you believe some of the comments, including from the member for Exeter earlier on, this government has not been funding cycling. That's quite untrue, and in fact we're funding cycling more than the previous Labour government did. Between 2005 and 2010, the previous administration spent £140 million, 200 million with match funding, on cycling. Under this administration, £278 million, 375 million with match funding will be spent in our 5-year period. That's almost double what the last government spent in the previous 5 years. So I think when members opposite complain there's not enough funding, a little more humility, I think, would not come amiss. I entirely agree with the comments made by honourable members that it's important not to neglect rural areas, and that's why the government has committed £600 million through the Local Sustainable Transport Fund, which is equated to £1 billion with match funding, and that Local Sustainable Transport Fund has funded 96 projects, 94 of which have cycling elements. And there's been a further £100 million capital and £78 million revenue funding allocated for the LSTF in 2015-16. We've seen £44 million committed throughout this Parliament to support cycle training for school children. And I might just say to the Shadow Secretary of State, the first thing which we did as a coalition government on cycling was to commit for bikeability funding throughout the whole Parliament to give the certainty which she says she wants. And of course, the £159 million has been announced in addition to all that since the beginning of 2012. £94 million to increase cycling in 8 cities and 4 national parks, £20 million to deliver safer junctions outside London, £15 million to enable cycle parking at rail stations, £15 million to provide more safe cycle links between communities, £15 million for junction safety in London. So I think in times of plentiful, we had 200 million. In times of hardship, we've had 370 million from this particular coalition government. I will briefly.
Most grateful. I'm concerned that a lot of the money under the last government and this one that's spent on cycling measures is spent badly because the planners and engineers who design road systems don't understand cycling well enough. Would the Minister meet with the Institute for Civil Engineers, the Town Planning Institute and others to try and create a professional qualification for cycling planners and then to insist that local authorities use such people in designing their schemes?
Well, I would say in terms of the LSTF schemes, which are 94, they were all subject to expert analysis, including by those from local authorities and others who know about cycling. But if he's got particular people he thinks would be helpful for me to meet with him, I'm very happy to do so, and he should just phone up my office and we'll sort that out. I want to also mention a key recommendation which hasn't been touched on very much to my surprise in the all-party report about cycle proofing, although the Shadow Secretary of State did refer to it in her comments. The Action for Roads Command paper in July this year made it plain we want to cycle-proof our network and minimise situations where major roads are a barrier to walkers and communities. All new roads and improvement schemes on the strategic road network will be designed with cyclists as well as motorists in mind. Almost £5 million for 14 schemes identified in the strategic road network, where the government will fund significant improvements to remove barriers to cycling, are going ahead, with a further £15 million for such improvements in 2015-16. And officials are currently planning a conference on cycle-proofing roads later this year to involve Council chiefs, directors of highways and planning, representatives from local economic partnerships, national park representatives and so on, to make sure we've got the expertise there and we can work out how to best cycle-proof our roads, streets and communities.
I just didn't want him to move on. I didn't want him to move on without responding to my challenge respect of Junction 9 of the M3 and the Highways Agency, where we are trying to keep it. I know that he didn't want to move on before he touched on that, but I just wanted to give him a chance to.
Well, I congratulate him on getting that point in twice in this debate. Can I say I don't know that specific answer, but I will write to him subsequently. And indeed, if there are any other specific comments members have made which I'm not able to respond to, I will try to respond in writing subsequently. I would also mention that we are looking at the feasibility of how a new national cycleway might broadly follow the HS2 corridor as well, which would link people, communities and local stations to the countryside and tourist attractions and benefit those living along the HS2 corridor. We're looking for these opportunities to improve cycling. Now, I also want to touch on the subject of the safety of cycling, which of course is very important. And let me just be quite clear that the Transport Secretary and others have made it very clear that any death on the roads involving a cyclist is one too many. And we're determined to take whatever action we can to minimise the number of cycling deaths. That's why I've made it possible for local authorities to install trickster mirrors at junctions without having to apply to Department for Transport, and why my colleague, the member for Wimbledon, has been so assiduous in trying to deal with the problems of HGVs and some of the points which quite rightly have been made by members opposite about making sure that they are properly dealt with in terms of mirrors, in terms of cameras and so on. To pick up one point the Shadow Secretary of State, Secretary of State made, there have been no incidents involving cyclists have been reported involving semi-trailers since the trial began, I'm happy to say.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? He'll perhaps be aware that I've been in discussion with some of the heavy goods vehicles trailer manufacturers, and I know that they would be very willing to see additional safety measures and will be happy to work with the department to achieve that. Will he join me in welcoming that initiative and seeing how that can be progressed very quickly indeed?
I certainly welcome that, and I welcome the constructive response we've seen already from the Freight Transport Association, for example. So that comment is very welcome, and I'm sure my colleague, the member for Wimbledon, is aware of that and is able to take that on board and move forward appropriately. Now, as I say, any one death on the road is one too many. I'm looking at the figures for London, which show that between 2008 and 2012, 53% of all pedal cycle fatalities were as a consequence of direct conflict with HGVs. So there is a serious issue, which we're very much aware of. I think the Mayor is aware of it as well, and as I say, we're taking steps to deal with that through a number of changes. But it's also important to note that cycling in London has increased by 173% since 2000, and figures for cycling deaths and injuries had to be borne in mind in relation to the big increase in cycling which is taking place.
I'm grateful to the Minister. On the point of HGV safety, tomorrow morning I'm visiting the regeneration site at Battersea Power Station, where the developers and the owners and the constructors are actually running a specific day of cycle awareness training with HGV drivers and cyclists. Does he welcome this move where developers take responsibility for the HGVs moving in and out of their own site, and perhaps this is a way forward?
I think that's exactly the right response, and I hope that will become common practice across industry and across the country. Now, I want to respond to some of the comments which were made by members. The member for Dudley North, in the previous debate, I think, had called for the Prime Minister to lead and take action, and he was very nice to me today, but lamented the fact that I was, he implied, as dealing with this without support. That's not the case. There was support from all my colleagues in the Department for Transport, there's support from different departments across government, and the fact that the Prime Minister himself made a statement in August clearly indicates the importance which the government as a whole attaches to this particular issue. And if any of colleagues across government weren't taking the matter seriously, I'm sure the Prime Minister's appearance in August will ensure that they take the matter more seriously explained previously they did. There's been a number of suggestions that we should have a cycle champion, and I was asked by the member for Poplar and Lighthouse. By the way, I'm very sorry he's no longer on the front bench. I think he's been a very good minister in his time at Shadow Minister as well. Not just a member for Poplar, but a popular minister as well. He asked if I am the national champion for cycling. I hope I am a national champion for cycling, but so is my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, so are my other colleagues in the Department for Transport, so is the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister. We want to make sure this is owned across government by all departments, and if the danger is in having one person identified in that role, others don't feel the need to participate in the same way. I'm not particularly keen to use the word czar, by the way. I think the history of czars at the end of the Imperial Russia is not a happy one, and perhaps we can...
Or the last Labour government.
Well, we could probably do without that. I was grateful to my colleague member for Totnes for drawing attention to the health benefits, and I can tell her we did use the World Health Economic Assessment tool in assessing the Cycle City and National Park bids and grants, which we subsequently gave. She also mentioned 20-mile-per-hour limits, and I hope she'll welcome, as others have done, the fact that it's this government which has made it easier for local councils to introduce 20-mile-per-hour limits, something which I campaigned on for a decade before it finally became reality under this government. And she asked about enforcement, which is a matter which a number of members have properly raised. I can tell the House that I had a meeting along with the member for Wimbledon with Suzette Devonport, who is a lead member for ACPO, and she has agreed to rewrite the guidance for ACPO on the enforcement of 20-mile-per-hour limits, and that will be appearing, I hope, before very long. I have to say there are a couple of churlish, I hope I don't, a couple of churlish comments. The member for Newcastle complained about the government. I should point out she's had £10 million for 2 local sustainable transport tranches, £5.7 million for a Cycle City ambition, and £1.24 million for cycle safety funding, £17 million for Newcastle, and she was also a grateful member here today. The second most ungrateful member, I have to say, was a member for Brighton Pavilion, who said the government was doing nothing and forgot to mention the schemes she was identifying at Brighton Station, the Cycle Rail Fund, and the cycle lanes in the Old Shore Road and Lewis Road are paid for from the government's funding. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted this has been such a good debate. I'm delighted so many people have turned up to contribute. I confirm that the government takes this matter very seriously. We will make further progress. And in the spirit of coalition unity, let me say I have something in common with Norman Tebbit. We both want people to get on their bikes.
To wind up the debate, I call Dr. Julian Huppert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it has really been fantastic to have such a great debate with so many honourable and right honourable members contributing comments. And the passion that there has been really fantastic. And the support for the report, the cross-party report on Get Britain Cycling, has really been very, very welcome. And I'm really pleased to see that. My own party will debate at our conference in 2 weeks, adopting this as part of our party policy and then in our manifesto. I hope that other parties will do the same, because it would be marvellous if at the next elections the parties are all offering some serious improvements on cycling. Governments for years, for decades, have not done enough. We're doing some more now. There is far more still to do. And I hope that the support today at this debate will add extra weight to that call for all of our parties, for this government and for all future governments, to try to do the best to get Britain cycling. It has also been fantastic. Well, we've had so many honourable and right honourable members here today. Outside, we have had a huge number of cyclists, some 5,000 cyclists organised by the London Cycling Campaign, showing their support for what we're doing, trying to help to get Britain cycling, and in my case, to have the Cambridge Cycling Campaign involved in all of that. I'm really delighted that we've had this. I hope it will give an impetus to improve facilities for cyclists and also pedestrians, and consequently for drivers and all other road users. And
I'm most grateful to the honourable gentleman for winding up the debate so pithily. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.